So, a few weeks ago, I made a video talking about a family tragedy that was very devastating about my aunt who took her own life. Unfortunately, I have another family member that also, well, he didn't take his own life, but he died at a very young age. He died of a heroin overdose, so it was unintentional. I don't know the specifics of how he got into drugs and what happened there because he was 17, but that was. So he died in 2008. In 2008, I was 10 years old. So there was a huge age gap between us. So we didn't really have that close of a relationship. I have plenty of memories of him, unlike my aunt who died at an age where I really didn't have, like, I didn't really have memories of when I was 2 or 3 years old. But I had memories of Tommy, my cousin Tommy, and I always liked being around him. I always enjoyed his company. He didn't really care. I'm not gonna say he didn't care much for me. He didn't really like do much with me though, because like when I was 5 years old, he was 12, and he always hung out with his older, with his friends that were his age. But when like when you're little, especially, you always look up to the older kids. You put them high on a pedestal because you view them kind of like as role models, sort of. I didn't know about any of the stuff that he was actually doing though, or he was into. I guess he either he kept it well hidden, or I was just too young to really understand what was going on. I didn't really notice any changes in his behavior though, but yeah, the last time I saw him was a few months before he passed away, hanging out at my aunt's house with my little cousin, and he was there too. And I remember we were hanging out all day, and we had a lot of fun. And I always think of him very highly. I do, even though I didn't really know him, if we're gonna be honest. But his death definitely had an effect on me, and really like brought home like, yeah, don't fuck with this shit, especially the hard drugs like heroin. Don't even think about touching it, because he was 17 years old. If he was alive today, he would be 34. I'm sorry, he would be 18, 19, 33. Still, that's like half his life, like another half of his life that he would live up to this point if he didn't die and if he didn't OD. And that's really sad when you put it into that perspective, which I didn't really think about before hitting the record button, like that, like how old he would be now and how much life he would have lived, like the entire life that he lived before, he would have lived another one of those lives. Ugh, horrible, horrible. Going to the funeral, I remember just like, first of all, I remember when the when my mom got the call. I remember my sister just hysterically crying because my sister was a lot closer with him because they were a lot closer in age. She was like maybe a year or two younger than he was, but I was 7 years younger and I was still a kid when he died. So there's obviously a huge difference, and she took it a lot harder than I did. Even though I did take it hard though, because it's just like I never knew, like, so I had a couple of family members die at that point, but aside from my aunt that took her own life, who I didn't even remember or know, all the other people that died up until that point were older people. So I had this understanding that, oh, when you're older, you die. But I didn't really have it in my head that you can die at 17 years old. So that was a really difficult thing to process at a very young age. It was a very valuable lesson, though. I attribute his death to one of the main reasons, like, why, like, I was really, like, hardcore against any drugs. I didn't fuck with any shit. Because even, like, obviously I knew there's a difference between like marijuana, even shrooms, like a difference between those and stuff like black tar heroin or whatever the fuck he was into. Like, I understand the distinction, but I was just like, so just because he died of a drug overdose, I was just so averse to all drugs because I was just very cautious with that because it did, it was a traumatizing thing. I was crying hysterically at his funeral, seeing his girlfriend, like at the same age as he was, high school kids at the funeral, and his little siblings that were my age, and his mother. I just didn't understand how all this like could happen and how it was even possible. I still don't even know the specifics of how he got hooked in the first place. He obviously got in the wrong crowd with the wrong type of people. That's what I guess happened. I mean, I don't really know exactly. So, stay away from drugs. I think that's one thing that I could say. Another thing is that you never know, like just because you're young doesn't mean you're immortal. So, this goes beyond drugs. Just doing stupid shit in general. You're not just guaranteed to live and survive just because you're young. Because, like, young people always do dumb shit because they think that they're invincible and that nothing could happen to them. So many people that do that shit. So that's another takeaway, I think, from there. And I remember he died right around the time that Pokemon Diamond and Pearl came out. If you guys are familiar with that game, you had a rival in the game. His name was Barry, but he had like the puffy blonde hair. I thought he looked just like Tommy, and it really was like surreal to me. I felt like he came back to life in my video game. So every time that I play Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum, I always name my rival Tommy because he looks just like him and he reminds me of him. And it's kind of like still having Tommy in my life and paying tribute to him 15, 16 years later. But man, I wish that he didn't get into that shit. I wish he was still around because he was a good kid. He really was. And he didn't deserve, what happened to him, even if he made bad choices, whatever you want to say. Still a kid, and it's just horrible. So it's one of the many tragedies that my family has experienced, and it's one of them that really sticks with me the most, just because of how young he was and how young I was, and that really resonated with me.